March 6, 1944, a formation of American B-17 bombers approached Berlin for the first time in daylight, but something was different. Gleaming silver P-51 Mustangs surrounded them like a protective swarm, and experienced Luftwaffe pilots who'd faced Spitfires and Thunderbolts without flinching suddenly broke formation and fled. Within weeks, German Fighter Command issued unofficial guidance: avoid the Mustangs at all costs, even if it meant letting the bombers through. But what could make battle-hardened aces who'd survived years of combat choose retreat over engagement when they saw those distinctive silver wings? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter morning of March 6, 1944, started like many others at the German fighter base outside Berlin. Major Klaus Weber sat in the ready room and drank weak coffee that tasted like burnt grain. He was 28 years old, but looked older. 3 years of war had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. He wore the Iron Cross on his chest. He had shot down 42 enemy planes. The other pilots looked up to him. They trusted him to bring them home alive. The base itself told the story of Germany's war. Once, the hangars had been full of new planes. Mechanics had worked around the clock. Fuel trucks had come and gone without worry. But now things were different. Very different. Only half the hangars held working aircraft. Many planes sat broken, waiting for parts that never came. The fuel trucks came less and less. Sometimes pilots flew practice runs with almost empty tanks just to save fuel for real combat. The mechanics looked tired. They worked with whatever they could find. They fixed one plane by taking parts from 3 others. Weber remembered when things were better. In 1940, he had flown over France and felt unstoppable. His Messerschmitt Bf-109 had been faster than the French planes. His squadron had controlled the skies. They had shot down enemy after enemy. The whole Luftwaffe had felt like giants. They believed nothing could touch them. Germany would win. It was only a matter of time. But 1944 was not 1940. Weber could feel it in his bones. Every day the American bombers came. Wave after wave of them. Big 4-engine B-17s that the pilots called flying fortresses. They came in formations of hundreds. Their machine guns pointed in every direction. When German fighters attacked, the bombers flew so close together that their guns created walls of bullets. Many German pilots died trying to break through. Weber had lost 12 men from his squadron in the past 4 months. Good men, experienced men, boys who would never see their families again. The Americans had fighter escorts too. First came the P-47 Thunderbolts. They were big and heavy but could take a beating. They stayed with the bombers for part of the trip. Then they had to turn back. Their fuel ran out. That was when the German fighters struck. They waited for the escorts to leave. Then they attacked the bombers when they were alone. It was dangerous, but possible. Weber had developed tactics. His men knew what to do. The food situation made everything harder. Weber's breakfast that morning was a thin slice of dark bread and some potato soup. The bread had sawdust mixed in to make it go further. The soup was mostly water. His stomach hurt from hunger. But he told himself that soldiers had always gone hungry in war. At least he ate better than the people in the cities. At least he had coffee, even if it was fake coffee made from roasted grain. The politics hung over everything like a dark cloud. Pictures of Hitler watched from every wall. The Nazi Party officials came to the base sometimes. They gave speeches about final victory. They talked about secret weapons that would change the war. They said Germany would triumph. But Weber saw their eyes. Even they did not believe their own words anymore. Still, no one spoke against the party. Not out loud. Men who asked too many questions disappeared. Everyone knew this. Everyone stayed quiet. The alarm bell rang at 10 in the morning. Weber and his pilots ran to their planes. The operations officer shouted orders. American bombers were coming, heading for Berlin. More than 300 of them. Every available fighter had to get in the air. Weber climbed into his cockpit. His hands moved through the startup checks automatically. He had done this hundreds of times. The engine coughed and roared to life. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust. His plane used low-grade fuel now. It made the engine run rough, but it would fly. It had to fly. 12 Messerschmitts took off in pairs. They climbed through cold air toward 25,000 feet. Weber could see Berlin in the distance. Smoke already rose from previous bombing runs. His city, his people down there. He felt anger burn in his chest. He would stop these bombers. He would make them pay. Then his radio crackled. The ground controller's voice came through, tight with stress. The controller said something that made Weber's blood run cold. The bombers had escorts. But not the usual P-47s. Something new. Something different. The controller called them P-51 Mustangs. Weber had heard rumors about these planes, but never seen one. The rumors said they could fly all the way to Berlin and back. The rumors said they were fast, very fast. Weber looked ahead and saw them. Silver shapes glinting in the sunlight. They flew high above and around the bomber formations. There were so many of them. Maybe 100, maybe more. They moved with a grace that Weber had never seen before. They did not fly like the heavy P-47s. They flew like dancers, like sharks circling prey. His wingman's voice came over the radio, young and frightened. The boy asked what they should do. Weber opened his mouth to give orders, to tell his men to attack. But something stopped him. Some instinct, some feeling deep in his gut that whispered danger. Those silver planes did not look like anything he had fought before. And for the first time in 3 years of combat, Major Klaus Weber felt real fear creep into his heart. Weber pushed his throttle forward and dove toward the bombers. His 11 pilots followed behind him. They had done this many times before. The plan was simple. Come in fast from above, hit the bombers hard, break away before their guns could track you, get out fast. His plane shook as he gained speed. The cold air screamed past his canopy. Then the silver planes moved. Weber had never seen anything like it. The P-51s did not lumber into position like the old P-47s. They did not take time to build speed. They simply turned and came at him. One moment they were far away. The next moment they were right there. It was like they appeared out of nowhere. Weber's heart jumped into his throat. He pulled hard on his stick to turn away. His plane groaned under the strain. He looked back and saw a Mustang on his tail. It stayed with him through the turn. His Messerschmitt could not shake it. Weber dove straight down. This usually worked. German fighters could dive faster than most Allied planes, but the P-51 followed him down easily. It closed the gap between them. Weber could see the American pilot in the cockpit now. The man looked calm, relaxed, like this was easy for him. Bullets suddenly streaked past Weber's wing, bright tracers that looked like angry fireflies. He jinked left and right. His plane shuddered. He heard metal tear. Something hit his right wing. He smelled smoke. Finally, Weber managed to pull away by flying through his own bomber formation. The American pilot would not follow him there. Too many German guns. Weber's hands shook on the controls. He had been flying combat for 3 years. He had fought Spitfires over Britain. He had fought Russian Yaks on the Eastern Front. But nothing had ever stayed with him like that Mustang. Nothing had ever felt so completely in control. He looked around the sky and saw his squadron falling apart. 2 of his planes were already gone, just empty sky where they had been. 3 more Messerschmitts were running away at full speed with Mustangs chasing them. The Americans were not just faster, they were better at everything. They turned tighter, they climbed faster, they dove harder. It was like watching wolves chase rabbits. Lieutenant Schmidt's voice screamed over the radio. He was the youngest pilot in the squadron, only 19 years old. He begged for help. Weber looked and saw 3 Mustangs surrounding Schmidt's plane. They took turns shooting at him. They were playing with him like cats with a mouse. Weber wanted to help, but he could not. Another Mustang was already turning toward him. He had to run. He hated himself for it, but he had to run. Weber dove for the clouds below and disappeared into the gray mist. His engine coughed and sputtered. Something was damaged. Oil pressure was dropping. He nursed his plane back toward base and thought about what he had just seen. Those American planes were not just good. They were perfect. Every single one of them flew smoothly. Their engines ran clean. No black smoke, no rough sounds. They had fuel to spare. Weber had watched them chase his men for miles without slowing down. His own plane could barely make it home.
When Weber landed, he counted his squadron. Only 8 planes came back. 4 men were dead. 4 families would get letters. 4 empty beds tonight. The other pilots climbed out of their cockpits, and nobody spoke. They all had the same look in their eyes, the look of men who had seen something terrible, something that changed everything. The mechanics swarmed over the damaged planes. They shook their heads. Not enough parts to fix everything. They would have to choose which planes to repair. Weber walked to the ready room and sat down. His legs felt weak. Other squadrons were landing now, other groups that had fought the Mustangs. The pilots all told the same story. Faster, better, impossible to fight. One pilot said he counted over 30 Mustangs in the air at once, and they all looked brand new, shiny, perfect, like they had just rolled out of a factory that morning. Weber thought about his own plane. It was 5 years old, patched and repaired 100 times. Parts from 4 different aircraft held it together. The paint was chipped, the cockpit glass was scratched, oil leaked from the engine, and this was one of the better planes in his squadron. Some of his men flew aircraft that should have been scrapped months ago.
The base commander called all the squadron leaders to a meeting that evening. The commander was an old man who had flown in the First War. He looked tired. He told them the truth that everyone already knew. The Mustangs had changed everything. They could escort the bombers all the way to any target in Germany. There was nowhere to hide now, nowhere to wait until the escorts turned back. The Americans would be over Germany every day, and those silver fighters would be with them. A captain asked what they should do. The commander did not answer right away. He stared at the map on the wall. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet. He said they would keep fighting. Orders were orders, but he told them to be smart, pick their battles, stay alive. There was no point dying for nothing. Weber understood what the commander really meant. Avoid the Mustangs if you can. The words were never spoken out loud, but everyone in the room heard them. Weber walked back to his quarters that night and thought about the young American pilot he had seen. That calm face, that easy confidence. That pilot knew his plane was better. He knew he had more fuel, more ammunition, more everything. He knew his country could build 100 more Mustangs for every one that got shot down. And Weber knew that Germany could not.
Weber started writing in a small notebook that night. He had never kept a diary before. It felt dangerous. If the wrong person found it, he could be arrested. But he needed to write down his thoughts. He needed to make sense of what was happening. The first entry was short. He wrote the date, March 6th, 1944, and then just one sentence. Today I saw the future, and it does not belong to us. The next morning, Weber watched the sky fill with American bombers again. And again, the silver Mustangs flew beside them. This time, Weber did not take off. His plane was still being repaired. He stood on the ground and watched his men fly up to meet the enemy. He counted the minutes. 12 minutes later, 3 of his planes came back. The other 5 never returned. Weber felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart. Something deeper. Something he did not have words for.
He thought about all the speeches he had heard, all the promises from the Nazi officials. They said German engineering was the best in the world. They said German pilots were superior. They said willpower and belief would overcome any enemy. Weber had believed these things once. He had shouted them himself to his men. But standing there watching those perfect silver planes dominate his sky, he knew the truth. It had all been lies. Beautiful lies that men told themselves to feel strong. But lies do not stop bullets. Lies do not make planes fly faster. Lies do not bring dead pilots back to life. Weber remembered a moment from 2 years ago. A party official had visited the base. The man wore a fancy uniform with medals he did not earn in combat. He gave a speech about German superiority. He said one German pilot was worth 10 Americans. He said American pilots were soft, weak, that they only won because they had more numbers. Weber had nodded along. His men had cheered. Now Weber wanted to find that official and show him the wreckage of German planes scattered across the countryside. He wanted to ask that man to explain how soft, weak Americans could build something like the P-51 Mustang.
A week passed, then 2 weeks. The pattern never changed. The bombers came every day with clear weather. The Mustangs always came with them. German fighters tried to attack and died. More and more pilots simply refused to engage when they saw the silver planes. They would climb to altitude, see the Mustangs, and turn away. Some claimed engine trouble. Some said they spotted different targets. Everyone knew the truth. They were choosing to live rather than throw their lives away for nothing. Weber found himself in the officers' mess one evening with Captain Brandt. Brandt was older, maybe 40. He had flown in Spain before the war. He was drinking schnapps, even though it was against regulations. Nobody cared about regulations much anymore. Brandt looked at Weber with red eyes and said something that could have gotten him shot. He said the Americans had already won. Not just this battle, the whole war. He said Germany was fighting with sticks and stones while America had machine guns. He said every single thing they had been told about American weakness was backwards. The Americans were not weak. They were the strongest nation on earth.
Weber should have reported Brandt. That was his duty. Instead, he poured himself some schnapps and agreed. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Weber spoke. He said he had figured something out. The Mustangs were not just planes. They were messages. Every time one appeared in the sky, it told the German pilots something. It told them that America could build anything they wanted, that America had so much fuel they could fly fighters all the way to Berlin and back, that America had so much metal they could wrap their planes in shiny aluminum instead of camouflage paint, that America had so many pilots they did not need to scrape together old men and boys. The Mustang was America saying, "We have everything, and you have nothing." Weber wrote more in his notebook that night. He wrote about dignity. He had always thought dignity came from fighting even when you were losing, from never giving up, from dying well. But now he wondered if real dignity was knowing when to stop, knowing when the fight was over. His men were dying for nothing. Their sacrifice changed nothing. The bombers still got through. Berlin still burned. And tomorrow, more silver planes would come. He thought about his sister in Berlin. She had 2 small children. They lived in a basement now because their apartment building was destroyed. They ate rutabagas and water soup. His nephew was 6 years old and did not remember what chocolate tasted like. Weber wondered what the American pilots ate for breakfast.
He bet it was not sawdust bread. He bet their children were not hungry. He bet their cities were not burning. The propaganda posters on the base started to look different to Weber. They showed strong German soldiers standing over weak enemies. They showed German tanks crushing everything. They showed eagles and swastikas and victory. But Weber looked at these posters and saw lies. He saw drawings made by people who had never seen a P-51 Mustang, who had never watched their friends die because German fuel was watered down and American fuel was pure, who had never felt their plane shake apart because it was held together with spare parts, while the enemy flew machines fresh from factories that ran day and night. Weber made a decision. He would not order his men to attack Mustangs anymore. If the Mustangs were there, they would find other targets or come home. He could not say this out loud. He could not write it in reports. But he could do it. He could save some lives. That was all the dignity he had left, the power to choose which of his men might see another sunrise. And he knew now that power did not come from propaganda or belief or willpower. Real power came from factories, from resources, from having enough of everything. Germany had run out. America had plenty. The war was over. Only the dying remained. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Weber was still alive. Many of his friends were not. His squadron had started the war with 42 pilots. 3 came home. Weber was one of them. He had survived by doing what he decided that night after first seeing the Mustangs. He avoided them. He picked battles he could win. He brought his men home when he could. Some called him a coward. Weber did not care. He was alive. That was enough. The journey back to Berlin took 3 weeks. The trains did not run right anymore. The tracks were bombed. The stations were destroyed. Weber walked most of the way. He still wore his uniform because he had no other clothes. People stared at him on the road, some with anger, some with pity. Nobody thanked him for his service. Germany had lost. Soldiers were reminders of that loss. Weber understood. He felt the same way about his uniform. Berlin was not the city he remembered. Whole neighborhoods were just rubble now. Mountains of broken brick and twisted metal. The smell of death still hung in the air even though the fighting had stopped months ago. Children played in the ruins. They looked thin. Their clothes were rags. They searched through the rubble for anything useful. A bent nail, a piece of wire, anything that could be traded for food. Weber's apartment building was gone. Just a pile of stones where it used to stand. He stood there for a long time, looking at nothing. He had lived there for 8 years before the war. He tried to remember where his bedroom had been, where his kitchen table had sat, but it was all gone, erased, like it never existed. He felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, just emptiness. He found his sister in a refugee camp on the edge of the city. She was living in a tent with her 2 children. She looked old now, though she was only 32. Her face was hard. Her hands were rough. She cried when she saw Weber. She had thought he was dead. Most of the pilots were dead. She held him and asked if he was hungry. He said yes. She gave him half her bread ration. It was not much, just a small piece of dark bread that was mostly sawdust, but she gave it to him anyway. That was when Weber started to cry. Not because of the bread, because his sister, who had nothing, still wanted to share. The American occupation forces arrived in their sector a few days later. Weber watched them drive through the streets in trucks that looked brand new. The trucks were painted green and ran smoothly. No smoke, no strange noises, just perfect engines doing their job. The American soldiers looked healthy. Their uniforms were clean. They had full canteens of water. They handed out chocolate bars to the children. Weber watched a little boy bite into chocolate for the first time in years. The boy's eyes went wide. He started crying from joy. A simple chocolate bar made him cry. Weber thought about the Mustangs. He thought about how he had known, standing on that airfield watching those silver planes, that America had won the war before Germany even knew they were losing. The trucks were the same message as the Mustangs. They said America could make anything. They said America had everything. And they said Germany had been fighting a war they could never win.
When Weber landed, he counted his squadron. Only 8 planes came back. 4 men were dead. 4 families would get letters. 4 empty beds tonight. The other pilots climbed out of their cockpits, and nobody spoke. They all had the same look in their eyes, the look of men who had seen something terrible, something that changed everything. The mechanics swarmed over the damaged planes. They shook their heads. Not enough parts to fix everything. They would have to choose which planes to repair. Weber walked to the ready room and sat down. His legs felt weak. Other squadrons were landing now, other groups that had fought the Mustangs. The pilots all told the same story. Faster, better, impossible to fight. One pilot said he counted over 30 Mustangs in the air at once, and they all looked brand new, shiny, perfect, like they had just rolled out of a factory that morning. Weber thought about his own plane. It was 5 years old, patched and repaired 100 times. Parts from 4 different aircraft held it together. The paint was chipped, the cockpit glass was scratched, oil leaked from the engine, and this was one of the better planes in his squadron. Some of his men flew aircraft that should have been scrapped months ago.
The Americans set up a food distribution center in what used to be a school. Weber stood in line with thousands of other Germans, old men, women, children. They all waited for hours to get a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. The soup was thick. Real meat floated in it. Real vegetables. Weber could not remember the last time he had eaten real meat. The bread was white, soft, made from real wheat with no sawdust mixed in. He ate slowly. He wanted to make it last. An American soldier watched him eat. The soldier was young, maybe 20. He looked uncomfortable, like he felt bad for the Germans standing in line. Weber wondered if that soldier had flown a Mustang. Probably not. The pilots were officers. But maybe this soldier had built Mustangs in a factory. Maybe he had loaded bombs onto B-17s. It did not matter. They had all been part of the same machine. The machine that ground Germany into dust. Weber started working for the Americans after a few weeks. They needed people who spoke English. Weber had learned some English before the war. He became a translator. He helped the Americans talk to German civilians. He helped them understand what people needed: food, medicine, shelter. The Americans tried to help. They were not cruel. They could have been cruel. Germany had done terrible things. Weber knew this now. The Americans showed him pictures from the camps, the death camps. Weber had not known. Many Germans had not known, or they had not wanted to know. The pictures made him sick. He threw up behind a building. An American officer found him there. The officer did not yell. He just put a hand on Weber's shoulder and said one word: "Yeah." Weber kept his notebook through all of this. He added entries every week. He wrote about what he saw. The contrast between the Germans and the Americans. The Germans were starving, and the Americans were healthy. The Germans had no fuel, and American trucks drove everywhere. The Germans wore rags, and the Americans had clean uniforms. Every single thing was backwards from what the propaganda had said. The Americans were supposed to be weak, but they were strong. The Germans were supposed to be superior, but they were broken.
One day, Weber was translating for an American general. The general was touring the ruins of a factory. The factory had made Messerschmitt fighters. Now it was just twisted metal and collapsed walls. The general looked at the wreckage and shook his head. He said something that Weber never forgot. He said America had built over 15,000 P-51 Mustangs during the war. 15,000. Weber did a quick calculation in his head. That was more than all the fighters Germany had built in the entire war of all types combined. The general kept talking. He said American factories had built a new bomber every hour, a new fighter every 5 minutes, numbers so big that Weber could not understand them. The general said the war was won in factories in Detroit and Los Angeles and Pittsburgh. It was won by workers who never saw combat, by women who built planes while their husbands fought, by a whole country working together while Germany starved its people and worked its slaves to death. Weber wrote in his notebook that night. He wrote that the Mustangs had taught him the real meaning of power. Power was not about willpower. It was not about believing hard enough.
It was not about propaganda or speeches or flags. Real power was simple. Real power was having enough. Enough food so your soldiers could fight. Enough fuel so your planes could fly. Enough factories so you could replace losses. Enough of everything. Germany had pretended to have power by taking it from others, by stealing, by enslaving. But that was not real power. That was just cruelty. Real power was building, creating, having so much that you could give chocolate to enemy children and still have plenty left over. Years passed. Weber stayed in Berlin. He married a woman who had also lost everything in the war. They had a daughter. He taught his daughter English. He told her stories about America, not about the war, about what he learned from the war. He told her that the world was bigger than one country, that no nation was superior just because they said so, that real strength came from working together, not tearing others down.
When his daughter asked about the war, Weber always told her about the Mustangs. He described how they looked in the sky, silver and beautiful and untouchable. He told her that those planes had saved his life by teaching him the truth before it was too late. If he had kept believing the lies, he would have died attacking them. But he saw the truth and chose to live. He told her that seeing the truth, even when it hurts, is always better than believing a comfortable lie. Weber kept the notebook until he died in 1983. His daughter found it when she cleaned out his apartment. She read every entry. She cried when she read the first one. "Today I saw the future, and it does not belong to us." But she smiled when she read the last entry. It was dated 1982, almost 40 years after the war. Weber had written, "I spent 3 years fighting for Germany and 40 years learning what I should have known from the start. The strongest nations are not the ones who make the best weapons. They are the ones who make the best everything else. The ones who feed their people, who build good lives for everyone, who have so much that they can be generous even to their enemies. The Mustangs did not defeat me. They woke me up. And I will be grateful for that lesson until the day I die." His daughter kept the notebook. She sometimes showed it to her own children. She told them their grandfather had been a fighter pilot, but more importantly, he had been a man who learned to see past propaganda and pride, who learned that admitting you are wrong takes more courage than dying for a lie, and who learned that the real victory in life is not crushing your enemies, but building something good enough that enemies become unnecessary. The silver planes had taught him all of that, not through defeat, through contrast, through showing him what was possible when a nation was built instead of destroyed. That was the lesson Weber carried home from the war. That was the legacy he left behind. And that was why, on March 6, 1944, when Major Klaus Weber first saw the P-51 Mustangs over Berlin, his whole understanding of the world changed forever. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.